Okay, we're going to get started with our last presentation. So, Father Peter Fonseca is a priest in the Archdiocese of St. Louis, Missouri, and he is extremely well educated. He's got 3 masters and also a certificate from the National Catholic Bioethics Institute. And in addition to being, he got a battlefield promotion, as a matter of fact. He just became pastor of Sacred Heart Parish in St. Louis, in Florissant, Missouri, where he had been serving as an associate pastor. So that's 2 weeks ago, which is why it didn't make the biographies. But he is also a national speaker on the subject of Catholic bioethics. And personally, I've really been looking forward to this particular talk. And without further ado, Father Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here with all of you guys. It's a nice little 90-minute trip down from St. Louis to Dallas, and hopefully 90 minutes back home to St. Louis tonight. So we'll see how that goes with airlines, but nothing till Mass tomorrow, so we'll make it work. Really is good to be here. You know, I've only been ordained a priest 5 years, and I think I went to a good seminary that prepared me very well. But the biggest thing that surprised me when I first became a priest was how death destroys families. It was shocking to me. I had experienced some death in my own family with grandparents and things like this, but never in my wildest dreams would I think that I would have a family in my office planning a funeral and the family fighting with each other right there in my office. It's almost Easter, right? Guess what Easter means? Time for family and loved ones. I love them, but it's about the time now where some of my parishioners are going to start coming to me. And you know what they're going to say? They're going to say, Father, do you remember you buried Mom like 6 months ago? Yeah, well, I haven't talked to my sister since the funeral. And I haven't talked to my sister because I think she killed Mom because she was the one responsible for making medical decisions. Or I haven't talked to my sister because she took the quilt that Mom made right before she died, and Mom said I could have the quilt. Mom probably told you you both could have the quilt. But you see the benefit of a plan? If this had actually been laid out, it's one of the greatest gifts you can give your family. Because it brings peace, it brings comfort, it brings calm. So as I've been thinking about this, I've been talking about end of life for a little while now. As you kind of seen today, there's sort of 4 parts to it, and we're going to hit the last of it today. There's the spiritual side. We're physical beings, but we're also spiritual beings, right? So there's the physical side. What do I do with all that money and stuff that's left behind? As well as what do I do with my health as I'm approaching the end of life? And then the spiritual side. Funerals and anointing of the sick, which we covered earlier today. So my hope today is to talk that area of, as we're journeying towards death and healthcare becomes more complicated, how do we get our minds right to begin to process and think through some of these things? Look, it's been a long day. I got up early this morning. I flew out here. I'm tired. I'm sure you're tired. It's a beautiful day outside, and here you are in here, which I'm grateful you're here. But if you think you're tired now and it's hard to focus, imagine yourself in the intensive care unit when you got to make a life or death decision. And if you haven't thought about some of these things before, it gets very difficult to make in the moment. And so I want to share some stories with you from a personal side that I've experienced, and I also want to share some principles with you, and then I'll open the floor for questions. In addition to my work in the diocese, I do a lot of clinical work in hospitals in the area of medical ethics. Priests in our diocese will call me and say, Father, so-and-so, my parishioners in the hospital, were struggling to work through some of these things. And so I hope to interject some of those stories there. Not to scare you, but just to show you the reality that exists. And my experience in traveling across the country is hospitals are not that much different across the country. Look, death is changing. We all want to die like the beautiful little stained glass image there with Father there at our bedside and our family all gathered around us, and we're just going to sort of sleep. We even speak that way. Oh, so-and-so passed away. It's my wish. That's what I want. But the reality is, for many of us, it's intensive care units and complex trauma that leads to our death. So if we don't think about it now, are we going to be prepared for those complex, sometimes split decisions? The good news is we're not left alone to face this. Our church gives us guidance to help us in this process of dying well. As Father was talking about earlier this morning, there is a difference. And those of us who have watched people die have seen the difference between people who have prepared and are able to die well and those who are quite literally fighting death to the last breath. So I hope to give you some tools and some confidence so that no matter what the circumstance is, none of us will get to decide, but whatever the circumstance is, we can be prepared even if we only have a few short moments to die well. To do that, though, I need to sort of situate this within the broader context. I will admit right now, too, I talk fast. I know this. My students always make fun of me for it, but we got a lot to get through, so I can answer questions as we go on. But if we don't understand who we are as human people, how can we even begin to understand what kind of treatment or what kind of rights and obligations are owed to us as human people? And so I want to, from the very beginning, situate our discussion in terms of who are we? If you get this right, a lot of the other stuff just flows naturally. I had a scripture professor in graduate school who said to me, just smell the heresy. He said, you don't even have to know why it's a heresy, but if it doesn't seem right, it probably is wrong. And then you can go to the expert and they'll tell you why it's wrong. The same thing here. If we understand who we are as people and our relationship to each other and our relationship to God, we have a pretty good clock inside our own brains. And yes, there are complicated situations that will arise that you will need consultation, but you should be able to understand the very basics. So the first thing is we are created in God's image and likeness. Very basic, the book of Genesis. What does this mean? We're not just another creature. We're not just something that was haphazardly compiled together. We're not a ton of molecules that are just sort of somehow functioning. We are created in God's image and likeness. Why? Because he desires it. When I talk with physicians and healthcare providers, I tell them this situates your entire life. What you do to the least one of these brothers of mine, you do unto me, Jesus tells us. When I talk to physicians, I say, when you are interacting with your patient, you are interacting with Jesus Christ. Most of us in this room, while not professionals, will have to be healthcare providers at some point in our lives. To a loved one, to a family member. And if we keep that in the forefront of our minds, that we're created in God's image and likeness, and that it really begins to situate the picture. My second principle for you is that we are redeemed in Jesus Christ. Our lives are not our own. We don't have ownership over ourselves. And by the way, when I say ownership over a human being, that should make you feel a little uncomfortable. But there's a lot of that out there in the medical world today. Right? None of us chose to be born. Leave religion aside, still none of us chose to be born. Oh yeah, and then bring religion in and you realize that it was Christ's passion, death, and resurrection, which we're about to celebrate here, that has redeemed us and gives us hope for eternity. Therefore, our bodies are not our own just to do whatever we want with. And then the last, we all share a common destiny. We're all ordered towards eternal life. We are pilgrims passing through this life. I know I haven't said anything too complicated yet. At least I hope you don't think it's too complicated. But let's just situate it all in this word. So I have a rule. I teach high school seniors because I need time off purgatory. So I teach them bioethics and I teach them apologetics. Oh, I tell them that too, by the way. And I have a rule in my class. You cannot use the word love because it's like the catch-all word in theology. If you say love, I really can't mark you wrong even though you said absolutely nothing. But if you truly understand love, it begins to make sense. I know it's cliche, but it's the reality that God loves us. But you and I know that love cannot be forced. Love demands a response. So if God truly loves us, which we know he does, we have to respond. And how do we respond? Look at John chapter 14. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. Very simple. We don't have to make this very complicated yet. Right? It's very kind of basic. Those who follow his commandments share an eternal life. Those who choose not to accept his love through their actions are separated from him. Not because of anything God has done, but because of what we have done. Catechism 101. This is why the moment of death, Actually, I just got in a debate with a religious sister yesterday. This probably wasn't good, but I told her, I said, your death is the most important moment of your life, and she wanted to argue that your birth was your most important moment of your life because you weren't going to die unless you were born. And I said, sister, I can't comprehend that. I don't do philosophy. I do ethics. But the death is one of the most important moments in your life. It's that last chance for repentance. Now, let me say this, because when I give these presentations, what I've experienced is a lot of times people are thinking back to concrete situations in their life, whether it was a parent, whether it was another loved one where you had to make some very complicated choices. I will be the first to tell you that the Catholic Church has probably failed you, and that I'm betting for most of you this is the first time in your life you've ever heard any kind of conversation on this. Remember, love is a choice, and God doesn't punish us because we do our best, right? So if you do start thinking back to yourself and you realize there was ignorance on your part, do not allow this to eat you alive as we begin to reveal some of the truth that's going on, okay? I want to say that from the very beginning. So as we're going to get into the nitty-gritties here, as we're getting to the point where our health is beginning to fade, we want to die well, where does the church get her guidance? The church gets her guidance in two ways. One, through faith. Jesus reveals the truth to us. Remember, the truth is not an idea. The truth is a person, Jesus Christ. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. It's an important distinction. But then also through reason. Our minds can comprehend some of these things as well. Although I have to admit, our minds are prone to mistake. And so we have to check ourselves. This is the beautiful thing about our Catholic faith, is that what we believe through faith and what we know through reason do not contradict at all. Why? Because God is the author of both, and there's no contradiction in God. Pope John Paul II wrote an entire papal encyclical on this matter entitled Faith and Reason, Fides et Ratio. He begins the discussion in that encyclical in his prologue by saying, faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of the truth. What? Yeah, John Paul, you're a poet. I get it. I'm not. Just spell it to me. Two wings, you need both. So this is partially why I got my degrees. I got my master's in theology. I wrote my first master's thesis, my MA thesis on the issue of cryopreserved embryos, a fun topic for another time. But then the problem was I would be asked to consult with physicians, and I kid you not, I was told by doctors, Father, thank you for being here. If you will offer a prayer, we'd appreciate it, but then you can take your Bible and you can go home because this is science. So what did I do? I got a Master of Science degree in biomedical ethics. And so now when they tell me that, you know what I say? Well, doctor, thank you very much. Just remember, academically, my MS outranks your MD. So if you would sit down, I would like to have a conversation with you. You will see my patience gets tried at times. Like everyone in the room, I am a sinner, and I will admit it, a work in progress. So what we're going to do here, and this is why I love the field of biomedical ethics, it's the place where faith meets science. And it's a fascinating realm when they begin to interact. So the first thing, and I think that's the hardest thing to realize, is that the church's teachings are for our own good. When I teach high school seniors, what's the only thing they care about in ethics? How far is too far? Where do I have to stop? They really don't care about the principles. They just want to know where the line is. They've totally missed the point. Look, God created us, and God loves us. The best definition I know of love is to will the best for the other. Isn't that true? If I love you, I want what's good for you. Therefore, God who loves me wants what's best for me. And so the rules that our church lays down are not to hold me back. They're actually to set me free. Good healthcare is Catholic healthcare. I could go on a rant for a long time. My eyes were changed to this when, don't ask me why, I found myself paging through St. Thomas Aquinas' lesser-known work, the Summa Contra Gentiles. And he's talking about sin, and here's what he says about sin. He says, God is only offended by us when we act against our own good. Whoa. God is only offended by us when we act against our own good. Sin isn't a bad thing because I hurt God. No, sin hurts me. Sin holds me back. Talk to anyone who's faced an addiction, and they'll be the first to verify it. So I say that at the outset because it's not just a set of rules. The goal here is to allow you to flourish in who you are as a human person. A human person created in God's image and likeness, redeemed, sharing the common destiny of eternal life. All right. Moral Theology 101, complete. We could teach an entire course on that, but I get you for an hour today. Nobody totally lost? No one wants to walk out yet? All right. So I want to do two things then. We're going to talk about basic principles, and then I'm going to try and anticipate a lot of the questions you guys have, those questions that come up to me in clinical settings. And then lastly, I will open the floor for all of your questions. Sound good? Let's just teach you a couple basic principles. If you can basically understand these, you can reason your way through a lot of situations. I love the priest of the Archdiocese of St. Louis, and this looks bad on me because one of my jobs in the diocese is I am responsible for their continued formation or training as priests. But it really drives me nuts when a priest calls me with a very basic question about bioethics. I want to scream, did you pay attention at all in the seminary? But then I realize if I do that, they won't call me when the complex stuff comes up. So I'm nice, but you're going to be smarter than a lot of priests in the Archdiocese of St. Louis if you just hang with me for the next 45 minutes. And I think St. Louis priests are pretty smart. All right, so we've kind of hit on this. What is our moral obligation? I think the psalmist says it best. When the psalmist in Psalm 37 says, turn from evil and do good, that you may be settled forever. St. Thomas Aquinas' most basic principle of morality, good is to be done and evil is to be avoided. What? You get to write that and you get a doctor of the church. And here I am going to school for years, and I don't have any title. This is not fair. But I think we understand this, right? Pretty basic, do good, avoid evil. So I think we have three obligations. One, we ourselves should not do anything wrong. But if I'm called to love my neighbor as myself, then I also have an obligation towards my neighbor. I have to prevent evil. And if one is in the midst of evil, I have an obligation in charity to call them out and to lead them to the truth. Now, it needs to be done the proper way, right? With dignity and respect for who the person is. But this is important because there's a lot of times where people are going to say, well, that's just my healthcare decision. I just want you to let me do what I want. Well, if I really love you, I'm not going to let you do something that's evil. We're going to have a conversation about that. And we're going to have to try and show you how this is actually evil or harmful. Does that make sense? All right. How then do I determine if something is good or evil? We all agree that we shouldn't do bad things and we should try and do good things. But how do I determine what is good and what is evil? Well, have you ever stopped to think about the actions that you do? This is why I am so messed up. I will admit it. If you stop and think about what you do, you will realize that every action has three parts to it. There's the action itself that you do. There's the reason why you do it. And then there's a bunch of circumstances surrounding it. So why did I get up at 4:30 this morning to get on a plane to fly here? Okay, there's an action there. What did I do? I woke up this morning. Why? Because I wanted to be with all of you. Because I had an obligation, whatever it was, right? And then there were a lot of other circumstances. My flight left at 6:30. It was however long to the airport, yada, yada, yada. So if you're trying to determine for the most basic part if an action is good or evil, all you need to do is look at what the action is, why you're doing it, and the circumstances surrounding it. And if none of those are bad, your action is good. Does that make sense? Let's give you a couple examples to play around with it. I'm going to introduce you to this fictional character, Tom. In all three of these cases, Tom is going to take opioids or prescription painkillers, okay? So in the first case, Tom is addicted to opioids. So he goes to his doctor and lies about his back pain. He's given a prescription for those medications. He takes the prescribed medication and he becomes intoxicated. Good or bad? Okay, I think that was pretty obvious, but let's break it down. What does he actually do? Okay, there's the approach with the doctor in which he lies. That would be bad. Let's talk about the point now he has the pills and he's at home. What's his actual action? Taking the pill, right? Good, bad, or indifferent? Well, you're just looking at the action, we don't know, right? It's not bad. I can't say taking pills is bad, right? Why is he doing it? to feed his addiction. Good, bad, or indifferent? Bad, this is a bad action. See how the game's played? Helpful? Let's take another case. Tom actually has legitimate serious back pain, and the only way for him to get out of bed is to take the opioids. He goes off to his doctor and is prescribed the pills. He takes the medication and becomes intoxicated, but he follows all the warnings that come with the medication. He doesn't drive, he doesn't operate heavy machinery, doesn't put others at risk. The action here is still taking the medication, right? Neutral. His intention, relieve back pain, that's good, right? We should try and relieve pain if we can. And the circumstances, he's responsible about it. It's a good action, right? Let's go to the third case. Tom has serious back pain, and the only way for him to get out of bed is to take the opioids. He goes to his doctor, he's given the pills. He takes the medication, becomes intoxicated. He then ignores the warning and goes back to his job driving a tractor trailer while taking the medication. Right, and this would be bad. So that's a very basic example. And please, 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 do not think about every action you do throughout your life in this way. You will not get anything done as your day goes on. However, you see when you're faced with a very difficult question or situation about should I do something or not, how this can be very, very helpful? Break it down. What is it that I'm actually doing? Why am I doing it? And what are the circumstances or the situations surrounding it? I'm about to muddy the waters, so if you don't understand, put your hand up now. Either you all lie or you're way smarter than my students. Let's muddy the waters then. There's the chart. All right, here's the problem. There are some times where I want to do something good, but I know that there are going to be bad, unintended consequences from doing something good. For example, the example I'm going to use in a minute, when we get to it, is at the end of life, when someone has experienced serious pain. Oftentimes, higher dosages of morphine are prescribed, which messes with respiratory rates and things like this, and it can hasten your death. We're not talking about pushing the morphine to the point that we kill you. That's clearly wrong. We're talking about a case where we're going to increase the morphine to try and make you comfortable and calm, but it will hasten your death. Is that okay? Yes, but let's talk why. It's too easy just to say yes. The reason is, just because I know something's going to happen doesn't mean I want it to happen. I know if I go to China, I'm getting the coronavirus. So it would be wrong for me to get on a plane and go to China, right? I don't need to put myself in front of that exposure. Now, if there was a legitimate reason that I needed to go to China, i.e., for example, I don't know, I can't think of a reason why I'd ever have to go to China, but you could come up with one. Maybe it's the case that my elderly mom needs to get home, and she can only do so if she's accompanied by me. And I know that if I go, there's a chance I might get sick. I don't want to get sick. I don't want a part of it. I could still go as long as 4 criteria are met. The act itself is at least good or neutral. We can never do something evil, okay? The second criteria, I only want the good to happen. So I might know the evil will occur, but if I could keep the bad thing from happening, I would. Or if there was another alternative to bring about the good result that didn't have this bad consequence, I would go the other route. Okay? The evil is never the means to the good. I can't do something evil to bring about a good. We can talk philosophy all you want later. But I can't do something evil to bring about a good. Okay? But here again, we'll talk about the morphine situation. And lastly, there's a proportionately grave reason for doing so. So let's look at the concrete situation of the morphine. Okay? Here I like charts. So we're going to take the morphine at the end of life. Is the act itself of taking morphine good, evil, or neutral? Good, right? I mean, the act of taking morphine, it's legitimately prescribed, Okay. Now, the question is, do I only intend the good? I would assume yes. Now, if somebody's saying, just keep that morphine coming because I want to end this and get out of here, now we got a problem, right? Is the evil the means to the good? No. The evil here is the hastening of death. But that's not what relieves your suffering. Do you see that? This is why it would be wrong to just pump morphine to the point that you would die. Then that would be the means to relieving your suffering, your death. Does that make sense? And there's a proportionally grave reason. You're dying, right? Now, there's other things you might want to consider. For example, has the patient had a chance to receive the sacraments if they want to? If not, it would seem moral for us to hold back on the morphine so that they could be lucid until we could get a priest that they could have the opportunity for the sacraments, because the supernatural is greater than the natural. Does that make sense? But we can't talk about every situation. All things being equal, this would be morally permissible. Helpful? All right. So now that we got a couple just very basic principles, I know you got 100 questions in your head. I'm going to try and predict a few of them now. These are complicated situations that come up in a lot of cases at the end of life. How much care do I need? It's a common question. Do I need to have this procedure done? The church speaks about this in terms of ordinary, extraordinary care or proportionate, disproportionate. You've probably heard those terms, but very few people understand what these terms are. These terms refer to the treatment itself, not the status of your illness. Is that clear? So, you have an obligation to use ordinary and proportionate means to preserve life. The church tells us that proportionate means are those in the judgment of the patient, offer a reasonable hope of benefit, and do not entail an excessive burden or an excessive expense on the family or the community. You're not required to bankrupt your family to get a chemotherapy drug. You are not required to take extreme amounts of pain just for a possibility of a cure. So some things that might be proportionate. There's a hope of benefit. It's commonly used. It's not too difficult. It's reasonably simple. And it's proportionate to one's status. Disproportionate, impossibility, greatest effort is required, excessive hardship, excruciating pain, extraordinary costs, intense fear or repugnance, right? Here's the thing. This can change by location. What is ordinary here in Dallas might be extraordinary in Calcutta, India. They don't have the resources. What is ordinary here in Dallas? So I went to graduate school in North Dakota, in Bismarck, North Dakota. What would have been ordinary perhaps in Bismarck would have been extraordinary on the Indian reservations because of the material. My own archdiocese, we have a mobile medical clinic staffed by physicians, one of whom is a religious sister. We were talking yesterday. She's in the old mines section, which is probably only about an hour out of St. Louis. But even the resources she has there are way different than the world-class healthcare you get at Mercy or Barnes Jewish. So it can fluctuate, right? But within that. So when you're looking then at whether something is proportionate or disproportionate, you have to look at the treatment itself. Now, you can choose to undergo disproportionate treatment. You have the right to choose that. I'm willing to take the pain for a chance of success. Let me share a story I had. It's been a few years ago. I was asked to consult on a case where a man had terminal cancer. He was in the hospital. There was a drug he could take that was basically going to keep him hospitalized, but he'd live for about a year. Or he could pass away within the next few weeks if he just ceased treatment. He was adamant that he wanted this treatment. However, his providers felt that they were just torturing him if they were going to give him this drug. So I met with him late at night, which is like the best time to meet people in hospitals because someone's always gone. So you'll find me doing these things at like 11 o'clock at night when there's no doctors around. I get a clearer picture. And I sat down, I said, okay, why do you want this? And after crying for a little while, he told me, well, you know, my daughter gets married in 3 months, and it's important for me and my family that I walk her down the aisle. Perfectly legitimate. So we came up with a plan. He ended up taking that drug until about a week before the wedding, went off the drug, was there for the wedding, and then passed away a few weeks later. At one point, he had talked about maybe waiting a few months after the wedding, too, so that there wouldn't be a roller coaster of emotion. Certainly within his right to do so. I think we would agree that that treatment was extraordinary or disproportionate, but he certainly has a right to it. Right? Now, he wouldn't have had a right to burden society on it. He couldn't ask the taxpayer to pay for it, but he had the means to cover it, and I think his insurance was willing to cover it, and no problem. Make sense? So this is why that level of the person is extremely important. It's not something that we can just judge necessarily and impose from the outside. There are certain limits that we cannot break. But a lot of these then become personal decisions. All right, the big one, nutrition and hydration. How many of you guys had lunch today? Please let me see your prescription. No, I'm serious. If you had lunch, I would like to see your prescription. Oh, it's not medical treatment, it's just nutrition. Right. Remember what I said about nutrition, proportionate and disproportionate? It refers to what? Medical treatment. Now, it is true that at some points we have to use medical procedures or treatments to administer nutrition and hydration. Then we have to make a judgment about the means of administering it. Is the means of administering it ordinary or extraordinary? But just nutrition and hydration, that is not medical care. That's just ordinary human life. And so thus under ordinary circumstances, we have an obligation to need it. Now, let me give you fair warning. When the body begins to shut down and die, the body can no longer assimilate these things. And thus, we're pushing food and water down your throat until the moment you die. There's what's called the active dying phase. I'll leave that to medical professionals to get into. But once we've hit that, you're not going to die of dehydration, starvation. When people are questioning whether they should take, for example, a needle or even a port or a tube, the question I encourage people to ask their physician is, if you are honest with me, when my loved one dies, what will be the cause of death? Will the cause of death be dehydration or starvation? Or will the cause of death be the underlying medical condition? If we can legitimately say the cause of death will be the underlying medical condition, then we should feel free to stop nutrition and hydration as is comfortable for the patient. Does that make sense? If they're going to die of starvation, we've got problems. If I put a picture of a child in Africa, you've seen the images, right, where they're really hungry. We get angry at that, and we should. We say, how do we live in this world today? But friends, we're doing it in our own hospitals. And I don't say this to sort of scare you, but you need to watch what happens in the hospitals. I'll tell you a case happened in one of our hospitals in St. Louis. One of the priests in our diocese called me and said, Father, I've got a patient who is admitted to the hospital for pneumonia. He was in his 80s, severely obese. We're confused as I'm visiting with him, his mental status is getting worse. But the doctors keep telling the family that his pneumonia is recovering. By the time I got to see him, he was seated in a chair in the hospital, totally out of it. He had no idea I was talking to him. So I asked to see the attending physician. I said, what is going on? Oh, we're just treating pneumonia, constant. I said, fine. So I got a release from the family to look at the medical records. And the first thing I go looking for is nutrition hydration. There was D5, which is basically sugar and water, right? A D5 solution. Why? Well, if you know anything about medical care, you do know that if you have fluid in your lungs, we're going to give you this barium swallow test to make sure that you're not putting other liquid down into your lungs as you swallow. Fine. He failed his barium swallow. Pretty typical for pneumonia patients. And so this attending physician said to me, but he cannot have water. He's failed this test. I said, I know, but there are other ways of administering this to him. So I asked her to come out in the hallway. Remember I said I'm a sinner? You're going to see it right here. I said, I could be wrong. All I know, though, is I have been asked to give a professional judgment and a professional opinion on this case to this family. And here's what my professional judgment is right now. You have looked at this patient in his 80s who's severely obese, and you have realized every time he comes into your hospital, you are losing money on him. You have acknowledged the fact that he is going to come back to your hospital probably again this year because of his obesity and is going to have chronic health conditions. You've also looked at him and said he doesn't really have a great quality of life because of his obesity. Therefore, in my professional opinion, and I could be wrong, but in my professional opinion, I think you see this as a simple way to solve the problem. I said, I could be wrong. I'm just going to get a cup of coffee and I'll be back to tell the family what I think. Came back about 15 minutes later, they started asking me about different things of artificial nutrition and hydration. That man eventually was discharged from the hospital, sent to rehab, is still alive today a few years later. Watch your loved ones in the hospital. Ask questions. Don't allow the physician to leave until you understand. You have a right to understand your health care. If something doesn't seem right, it's probably not right. I don't say that to scare you. I say that just because it's a reality. All right. This is a big one. It is illegal here in Texas, thankfully. Still illegal in my home state of Missouri, although in my home state of Missouri for 4 straight years now, they've introduced it into the legislature. It has died in committee all 4 years. Physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia. And it is phrased under the terms of compassion. I did a cover story for our local TV station on this, and I knew it wasn't going to be pretty. I sat down with this reporter for 90 minutes, and I knew they were going to take about 10 seconds of it. And then I knew very well, too, that they were also going to take this other sob story and make that the thing. Look, we're not the author of life. Murder is wrong. To want to kill someone is wrong. I think the problem here then is we've created a situation in our world where you only have value if you can do something. And so they'll say, well, they're terminal anyways. They're not useful. Or they will say, well, they want this. I don't know if you've ever talked with anyone. I've had numerous counseling sessions with people who have requested physician-assisted suicide or trying to find ways. And I'll ask them, I'll say, well, why do you want it? Number one reason? I don't want to be a burden on my family. Okay, there's a couple things we need to say here. One, is the family inadvertently expressing the fact that they're a burden? Let's acknowledge they are a burden. Let's just be honest. They're a burden. You have to cover them. You have to come in and you have to visit them. That doesn't mean that they should be treated as a burden. But what's our response? How do we communicate with them? What happens when we walk in the room to see them? The other thing, too, is they still can have benefit for us. My grandmother passed away after a bout from Alzheimer's. In the last few years, she would not recognize me. You know, if you've ever had a loved one, you know how hard this is. And I was in like 6th or 7th grade, and my father would say, you have to go visit grandma. And I remember telling my dad, like, why? It's a waste. She doesn't even know me. She's not going to remember if I was there or not. Why would I do it? He said, it's the right thing to do. You have to do it. Well, you know what? Those repeated actions of visiting her made me a more charitable person. Even though my grandmother may have appeared to have had no value to society, she changed me without ever having to do anything. Now, even if you could show me a case where they did not have any benefit, which I don't think you can, it still doesn't mean anything. We're not a product. We're creating God's image and likeness. This is the beauty of suffering. We're not going to get into the whole issue of redemptive suffering now because I would have to talk forever. But our suffering benefits others as well. Thus, there is no legitimate reason why one would need physician-assisted suicide or euthanasia. If you talk to physicians who specialize in palliative care, they will tell you in nearly every case we can actually control your pain to a point where it's not excruciating. So when I face people who are considering physician-assisted suicide, the first thing I recommend is, I recommend that they speak to a palliative care physician, because oftentimes they think it's worse than it really is. The second thing we do is we get a psychiatric consult. Why? It's natural inside of us to preserve our life. Somebody pulls a gun out of here, I'm running out of here. I'm not a hero. Right? Save my life. We do this all the time. So the fact that someone would no longer want to save their life would tend to imply that there's probably some sort of depression or some sort of mental condition there. And good psychiatric care and some medication can sometimes change that. So I counsel people in 2 ways. 1, let's have a serious conversation with a palliative care or pain specialist. Number 2, let's get a psychiatric consult and see if we might need the assistance of some psychiatric drugs as we go forward. I give that to you for your loved ones because it is not uncommon. Now, when I sat down for this interview, this reporter kept hearing me. She said, but don't you care? Don't you have compassion? Like, look at the pain. And if I looked at her, I said, how many people have you watched die? I've never seen anyone die. I said, welcome to my life because it's every single week for me. And I don't have to be there. They're not my family. I'm there because I love them and I want what's best for them. Oh yeah, where does that word compassion come from? It's a putting together of 2 Latin words, cum and passionis, to suffer with. There's an invitation for me to enter into their suffering and to walk the journey with them. Imagine how that can change relationships. I give you some quotes that might be helpful for the value of suffering. So then what is this Catholic approach to death? When death is imminent, when death is coming? First off, every person should have a right to know their information. They should know their situation, and they have a right to know what is coming. This, you'll be shocked how many times people say, Father, don't tell so-and-so they're dying. I don't want them to freak out. No, they need to prepare for death, and they have a right to know that they're dying. You don't get to lie and hide it from them. 2, an opportunity to discuss their condition with their family members and their providers, and to have an ethics consult if they need it. 3, they need the information necessary to address legitimate moral choices, and they need the spiritual support and the opportunity to receive the sacraments. Not complicated, pretty simple. So I get a lot of questions on hospice care. All right, hospice is a change. Normally, when you're in the hospital, we're focused on curing your illness or your disease, right? That's what the doctors are doing. They're running all these tests, they're giving you these medications. Why? Because they're trying to fix the problem. Hospice is more focused on the patient than the disease. We cannot cure that cancer. Not possible. Or if it is possible, it's extraordinary, and you've made the decision not to undergo that treatment. So now we're going to focus on you as a whole human person. We're going to work to reduce your suffering. We're going to bring in social workers to help you deal with family situations. We're going to bring in chaplaincy to help walk with you towards death. So it's a very team approach towards that. It's focused on the needs of the patient and the family. Now, let me say this. Just because you choose to stop undergoing certain treatment, you can choose to go off hospice. So a very common thing for people on hospice is urinary tract infections. Very common. So let's take the case for urinary tract. I'm going to take a real case. This is the mother of one of the priests in the Archdiocese of St. Louis. Mom is on hospice. Mom contracts a urinary tract infection. This priest says, can we get her the basic antibiotics to clear up the urinary tract infection? To which they say, well, she's on hospice. She can't have that. First off, that's not really true, but another discussion for another time. Because their argument is, well, that's extraordinary. No. Whatever her underlying condition for why she was on hospice, I can't treat that. A simple IV antibiotic is not extraordinary in any case. So I still need to treat that new condition. You see what I'm saying? You can't say IV antibiotics, which will cure the urinary tract infection, are extraordinary. There are other care in her life that would be extraordinary that we don't need to touch. We need to clear up the urinary tract infection. If you've ever known anyone who has a urinary tract infection, you begin to realize that it's very painful, and also that their mental status begins to go. Finally, so he finally calls me. He's like, I don't know what to do. I need help navigating the system. I said, send her to the emergency room. Gets to the emergency room, pulled her off hospice, fine. They begin the urinary tract infection. At that point when she went to the emergency room, there was no conversation with her. She was basically in that deep sleep. I think it was a day, maybe 2 of the treatment. She begins to have conversations, starts talking. He knows she's dying, so he sees this as his opportunity to have his last conversation with his mom. As the urinary tract infection clears up, they put her back on hospice. She passes away like 2 or 3 days later. Imagine the relationship change between a son and a mother by a simple antibiotic that was going to be rejected. So yes, you can go off and on hospice. Don't be afraid to do so. Okay? There's so much stuff I could cover. I don't have time for all of this, unfortunately. I need to just cram a couple things in about 5 minutes. To do that, we have to talk about what is death. Oh, there's a good topic. Death is the separation of the soul from the body. What? Okay, thanks. It is a singular moment. Now, here's the problem. I don't have any way of telling you when the soul leaves the body. I can't point to that specific moment. But I can look at a human person and say there are certain things that all living human beings have. They have a heartbeat. They breathe. They have brain activity, right? Therefore, a trained physician observing the human body can note that when these criteria are no longer there, that the person has died. Does that make sense? So you oftentimes hear time of death. That's not the exact moment they died. That's the moment at which the physician can be sure, after observing the body, that the person has died. Death is irreversible. You don't come back from the dead, by definition. You were not dead to begin with. Okay? So this is important when we talk about things to do with traumatic brain injuries or organ donation. Organ donation is a great gift. We are not, remember I said we're not just molecules or pieces put together? So if I give you my kidney, I'm not giving you a piece of me. I'm giving you me. Right? So we can donate organs, non-life required organs, at any time in our life as long as it's suitably healthy for you. So I can give you my kidney right now. I've got 2. And as long as I'm healthy, I should be just fine. Those organs that are required to sustain human life, I can only give once I have died. It cannot be the cause of my death. My gift to you cannot be my death. That makes sense? So I cannot give you my heart if I haven't died. This gets into the issue of heart transplant, which if you want to get into the field of biomedical ethics, this is a hotly debated topic. However, if there is no brain activity, and there's different criteria, they use different criteria across the country, even in my own home city, different hospitals are using different criteria as to how to measure this and over what time. If there's no activity at all in the brain, we can say you have passed. But we might, using drugs and a machine, be able to keep your heart pumping. Thus, you could donate that heart. Make sense? But you want to make sure that you're irreversible. Organ donors, I do not know what the state of Texas is. I'm sorry. Most states, you actually have to opt in, but I'm giving you fair warning. States are quickly changing to opt-out states. Because there's a serious shortage of organs, they're saying, well, we'll just assume you want to be an organ donor unless you tell us you don't. That's a problem. Because what makes organ donation so powerful? It's a free gift, and they're taking that away. There's nothing wrong with an organ donor. I am an organ donor. If you look at my license, it does not say I am an organ donor. There are supposed to be safeguards in place for this. There's different organizations, but I have seen it abused. My durable power of attorney for health knows I want to be an organ donor, and they know what organs I'm willing to donate. And that's good enough. Now, with that said too, just realize that organ donation is a question for our cemetery. It can sometimes affect things like viewings and things like that, depending on what you give and that kind of stuff. Okay? I'm running out of time, so I need to hit do not resuscitate orders. And then I also want to just real quickly cover MOLS and PULSE, and then I'll take your questions. And we'll get you out of here by 2. Sound good? Somebody pointed out that DNR is not so simple. There are different levels. And actually, hospital systems debate how many levels there should be. So you can go no CPR, you can go no drugs, you can go no ventilation. There's all different, no pressors, so you can even specify types of drugs. There's all different levels that hospital systems are using on this. Question is, what do you want? This, at the core, is a choice of ordinary and proportionate care. There are times where it may be ordinary care for you to be resuscitated. If I collapse right now, right here in my mid-30s, there's a good chance if one of you knows CPR that I could be resuscitated and have a normal life. At least in the very beginning stages of this, it would be ordinary care for me to receive CPR and resuscitation attempts. 85-year-old, even in the hospital, has an under 5% chance of recovery. Automatically now, this is becoming disproportionate. She could choose to have it if she wanted it, but certainly not required. Does that make sense? So it's simply an application of proportionate versus disproportionate care, and those same principles apply across the board. Covered that already. All right. My advice to you is, unless you are going on to hospice, to only have a power of attorney for health. If you're going to go onto hospice, then something like a MOLST or a PULSE could be acceptable. Here's why. In order to make an informed decision, I have to know potential outcomes. So have you ever been to the doctor and they try to tell you, like, okay, you need this procedure? They will tell you potential outcomes, what could happen, and the risks associated with it, right? It's the only way you can make an informed decision about whether that's a good treatment for you. There are just too many possibilities in the future that I don't know about, right? So if I fill out a living will that says, no, I don't want CPR, maybe I'm thinking about when I'm 90 in the nursing home. No, I don't want CPR, but right now I do. You see what I'm saying? So you can lock yourself into a corner. Get a durable power of attorney for health, assign it to somebody, choose wisely. My father is a surgeon. He is not my durable power of attorney because he doesn't know how to stop. He is trained to keep you alive. My mother was a nurse and is much more compassionate. She is my durable power of attorney for health. Okay? Mine is very simple. Mine is not very complicated. I'm a Roman Catholic priest who believes in my Catholic faith and demands that my faith be followed at all times. I want access to the sacraments, And then if it's a matter of life and death, my durable power of attorney must consult with a priest who has a minimum of a master's degree in theology to ensure that that choice is in line with church teaching. Now, I can be that simple because Mom and I have talked about it. She knows what I want. So if you're going to do it, talk and have the conversation. I'm the durable power of attorney for like 6 priests in the Archdiocese of St. Louis. I was telling someone earlier, when I got my degree, like 2 priests called me like, will you be my durable power of attorney? I'm like, I didn't even know you were priests in St. Louis. I said, yes, I will do it, but you and I need to sit down and have a conversation. Because as I hope you've kind of seen, there are certain areas that are out of bounds, but then there's a lot of stuff where you have legitimate choice in between. If I am your durable power of attorney, it's not what I would want. I'm acting on your behalf, on what you would want. And thus I need to know you well enough to make an informed decision. Make sense? All right, I could talk forever, but I got a 5:30 flight to get back to St. Louis today. So I will take some questions. They're gonna walk around with a microphone. I told them not to let me choose who I ask questions. So whoever you choose, we'll go with.
Just a quick question and a concern I have is once somebody has made the decision to go beyond and keep you alive, intubation, what might be, can you stop that?
Sure, you can cease certain treatments that are extraordinary. Now, you can back yourself into a corner with certain choices. I'll give you a real life case. I got called by a surgeon. A person had an aortic aneurysm, which is basically a death sentence. They were in the hospital. The surgeon told the family, I don't want to do this. If the patient survives, they will be in a persistent vegetative state. If they survive, I'll get them off the ventilator, but they will be in a persistent vegetative state. The family said, do it, do it, do it. 3 days later, the family said, we want him off the vent now. Oh, no. No, that's murder. Like, you're going to still survive. So sometimes choices can back you into a corner. But let's say you want to try the treatment for a while. So I want to start this chemotherapy and see if it works. And if it's not working or the pain is too much or whatever and it's clearly extraordinary, then yes, you could back off it.
You had said artificial nutrition. Is that required or not?
So under normal circumstances, artificial nutrition and hydration are required unless the body cannot assimilate it. Now, the cases can get complicated, okay? But yes, because the means of giving artificial nutrition and hydration are not extraordinary. It is cheaper for you to be on a peg than it is for you to go grocery shopping. And the pain can be minimized. Now, if your body cannot assimilate that nutrition, then we're harming you and we're not actually doing medical care and it could be stopped. So those patients who are at the end of their life who are dying and their body cannot assimilate it, then no, we don't need to go to that level.
There is something that you said kind of almost in passing, and it was within the framework of you talking about confronting a doctor about a choice of action that they had taken. One of the things that I've seen repeatedly in the course of my life is the number of people who will not confront a doctor about anything. And I've sold to them for years and years. I don't have any particular fear of them. But I think it's important for people to understand if there's something that your doctor says or does that you do not understand or agree with, go after him.
Right.
Go after him.
Right. Have the conversation, develop a relationship. Even if you can't do it with the physician, do it with your nurse. But then I will also say, too, remember, you always have recourse. So you always have a right to an ethics consult. Every hospital has a consultation committee. Most legitimate hospitals now actually have paid people who are trained in ethics working there. So yeah, you always have recourse, and don't be afraid to ask it. Before I go to the question, there was one other point I wanted to make. I'm sorry I'm a little jargon because I'm running out of time, but the issue was brought up about donating your body to science. Perfectly legitimately, morally acceptable. If it's, make sure you know who you're donating to. I'll tell you 2 things. So in St. Louis, we have 3 legitimate options. We have St. Louis University, the medical school there. We have Washington University, and we have Logan College of Chiropractic. St. Louis University, when they're finished with your body, they cremate it, and there's a burial plot that is paid for by the medical students. There's a beautiful service. You're interred in sacred ground. Washington University, they scatter your ashes on the campus. Logan does something similar. So you want to know what's going to happen to your body when you do make that gift, and that's a legitimate question to ask. I'll tell you one other horror story. I won't tell you which city I was in. I was at a medical conference, and I was literally coming into the conference to give a presentation, and I walked past a hallway. It was a door like this. It was open, and I saw human torsos on the table. I later found out they were there by drug reps who were going to try and sell some product, and they wanted to show surgeons how they were going to be used. They were real. I don't know where they came from. So do your homework about what happens to your body when they're completed.
So earlier a priest mentioned that the body should be in the ground, that was the teaching of the church. So how do you rationalize donations, and what happens to the body once they harvest these organs, and how do you control that? And so that's
Right.
2 questions.
So you could be very specific about which organs and tissues you wish to donate. That's your choice. You can offer everything. You can offer just a heart. You could offer skin. You could offer eyes. You can offer whatever. Those bodies then end up with our funeral homes, and you can be given a burial. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't preclude a burial. If you're giving your body over to science, you need to know what they do with the body when they're finished. The last thing I'll say about the donation of body to science is just because you want to do it doesn't mean they have to take it. And this can be a financial concern because it's very cheap. There's normally just like a recovery fee. But if you die because of serious infection, if you are severely obese, if you die in a traumatic car accident, your body is not useful to the medical center and they're not going to accept your body. And now all of a sudden you thought you were saving $15,000 and you're on the hook for $15,000 because the medical center won't take it. So just something to consider. 1 minute, one more. I'm not making choices.
If you donate your body to UT Southwestern Medical Center, the cremains will be returned to you in 18 to 24 months.
Okay, perfect.
And there is no fee.
Okay, perfect.
And also,
Yes, the cremains.
also, if you're in the hospital, you can always use a chaplain to broker the conversation between patient, family, and doctor.
Thank you very much. I'll stay around for a little while before I got to get to the airport if you guys have other questions, but thanks for allowing me to be here with you guys today.